Yes, thanks. This talk is, or most of the results I'm going to present in this talk is part of the thesis of Elke Eriksson, but she's defending her thesis in a week, so she was a little bit stressed, so I'm presenting it instead. When we started this project, the reason why we started it was that we saw there was an increased focus on using waste as a resource, and part of this is of course the change in the legislation that part of the waste needs to be treated and recycled, and there were different strategies to try to do this, and we wanted to investigate if there are any differences between how this was done and how the occupational exposure were in these facilities, these new facilities as well. And we set up the project like this, where we visited each plant for at least 3 days, where we had air sampling 2 days, blood sampling both on Monday and Wednesday. Also, we plan to do skin sampling. We did the skin sampling. We started this project in 2000, and we just managed to set up the project, and then the coronavirus hit. So we were sitting more or less idle for a year before we could start the sampling, and we did the skin biota, but when we were out, people were using very much the disinfectants, so we haven't done more with the skin data. We are hoping maybe we could do a follow-up and see if there are any differences with the skin biota now and during the pandemic. Those two kinds of the sorting plants we visited. We have the traditional manual sorting plants where people are sort of sorting the waste manually. There are still a lot of those plants as well. For instance, in Oslo, when we want to sort the plastic, we put the plastic in big plastic bags, and this goes to these facilities where they are opened manually, and people are sorting hard and soft plastic and manually. And also paper sorting, we are just putting all the paper in bins, and then there are people sorting if it's cardboard or paper and so on. So some of these facilities have a lot of manual sorting still. But several municipalities have started building these more automated waste sorting plants, where they thought at least were that people didn't need to come in contact with the waste during the sorting process. And these facilities were built with that notion that people didn't need to be there to work or work in the plants during the sorting process. But when these plants were put into use, they soon discovered that they needed a lot of people actually being in the plant, because we are not very good at sorting the waste, so people were throwing everything in the waste, things which could potentially ruin the whole plants if they didn't pluck them out. People put ammunition, gas tanks, everything. Also, nylon stockings could, we see a lot of times these get stuck in the traverses and stop the process as well. So people need to actually work in the plants the whole time. And some of the problems where these plants were not designed for people needed to work there the whole day. When I started the project, we thought, of course, that the manual waste sorting would be worse than the automated waste sorting. That was what we thought, at least, when we started. Here, A and B are two large automated waste sorting plants, and C is a small automated waste sorting plants. D, E, and F are manual waste sorting plants. A and B we visited several times, also during both winter and autumn and summer season. And sort of the main findings of the project is that we couldn't distinguish between manual or automated, and there were large differences also within each plant. So we couldn't really group the plants due to either the technology they used or sort of how they worked. So each plant needed to be investigated by itself. So each plant can't take lessons from another plant, but they need to do investigations themselves. Plant A was a little bit better than B and C, for instance, and that is also one of the take-home messages that we got, is that how the municipalities arrange their waste handling affect how the people working in the plants, regardless of how the plant is built. Because in A, they had separate bins for organic waste at homes, whilst in B, the organic waste is put in a green bag and then put in the general waste, and at the plants the green bags are taken out. But we see that the green bags are often ripped apart and sort of the rupture and so on, so you got a lot of food waste into the general waste. So one take-home message was that try to remove the organic parts as soon as possible, and preferably not get them into the plant at all. Yeah, and that it was, I think, impossible for them to make the plant so clean as not get exposure for the workers if they get organic materials into the plant. Also, endotoxins, the same there as for dust, that there was a lot of differences between the plants, and each plants rather need to be investigated separately, but also the plants where they didn't get organic household waste into the plants were better than where you got the contamination of the food in the plants. We saw some differences between autumn and summer. We didn't do the investigation in the winter. One could speculate that it would be even lower in the winter. Also, how often the food bins or the bins are emptied at the home probably also will influence what we find in these facilities. So they are sort of a little bit slave to the regulation of the local municipality. But not everything was sort of, they were trapped by how the waste sorting was handled, but also how they choose to work affected their environment. A lot of these plants are rather big, a lot of open conveyor belts, several stories, and during the cleaning you usually often use pressurized air to blow the dust down to the floor, and then they have machines to sweep the floor. But during this cleaning process they generate a lot of dust which blows around the whole sorting plant. So even if the person who is blowing, he is using a mask, but everyone who is working around doing other tasks in the plants are not using masks. But we see that the level of dust in the whole plant rises when they do this cleaning, which they do every day. And during the cleaning task, there could be quite high levels of dust. Just to show that a lot of the dust collected during the day was accumulated during this cleaning processes. So if they could change how they clean the plant, they could probably reduce the levels of dust. And this also we did communicate to them, but it is difficult to them to find other ways than during the blowing the dust down on the floors. We also looked upon the presence of fungi. We looked for fungal spores, sample fragments, and also submicral fungal fragments. And if you look upon the fungal exposure and what the fungal exposure consists of, you see that a large part of these, the fungal exposure actually was for the submicral fragments, which usually is not studied that much. We also in this study had questionnaires with respiratory symptoms, among other things, and we did see a correlation with self-evaluated the symptoms from the upper respiratory tract and the fungal exposure, total fungal exposure in the plant. So this at least seemed to influence how the health of the workers. We also collected bacteria and fungi to look upon what kind of fungal bacteria were present. We have done the Maldi-Toff investigation where for viable microorganisms, not the viruses, but bacteria and fungi. We have done the sequencing, but we haven't finished analyzing the sequencing, so hopefully that will come not too far ahead. For the viable microorganisms which we could identify, we see that many of them are in the class 2. That is microorganisms which are believed or are suspected to cause diseases in the workers. Maybe one task for PEROSH, when we see how the microorganisms are classed into 1, 2, 3, and 4, there are differences between the European countries. There is European legislation from 2000, I think. So it is rather old. So probably could be done some more harmonization on how the microorganisms are classified in the risk groups. But for fungal species, the 3 most prevalent fungal species we found were in risk class 2. Also for bacterials, the bold one are the class 2. Several of the most prevalent bacterial species were also in the risk class 2. So that was my 12 minutes, I think.